At 11:47 p.m., Angela Brooks ignored her younger sister's phone call for the third time that night. Rain slammed hard against her windshield while thunder rolled across the dark Georgia highway, but still, she refused to answer. The phone vibrated again in the passenger seat beside her, lighting up the inside of the car with the same name over and over. Vanessa. Angela tightened both hands around the steering wheel while tears blurred the road ahead of her. Her chest already felt heavy from a conversation she had spent the last 3 days trying to forget. She stared at the phone ringing beside her, then looked back at the highway and whispered something she would regret for the rest of her life. "I'll call her tomorrow." But tomorrow never came. Before sunrise, Angela Brooks would receive a phone call that would break something inside her forever. And hidden inside a voicemail she almost deleted was a message that would force her to confront a painful truth she had spent nearly 30 years avoiding. Because the night her sister died was not the beginning of the story. It was the moment Angela finally realized that sometimes God spends years trying to reach people who have quietly stopped listening. The storm grew heavier as Angela drove through the empty highway outside Atlanta. Water splashed beneath passing trucks while headlights flashed through the darkness like brief warnings disappearing just as quickly as they appeared. Vanessa's missed calls remained glowing on the dashboard screen beside her. 3 missed calls in less than 20 minutes. Angela exhaled shakily and turned the volume louder on the radio, hoping music would drown out the guilt pressing against her chest. But nothing could silence the exhaustion she carried anymore. At 52 years old, Angela had mastered the art of pretending she was fine. At the hospital where she worked as a nurse, people admired her calmness during emergencies. Patients trusted her immediately because her voice carried warmth even on difficult nights. At church, people called her faithful, dependable, strong. But none of them saw the version of Angela sitting alone in her apartment after midnight staring at old photographs while wondering when life started feeling so empty. None of them knew how emotionally tired she had become after years of disappointment, betrayal, and silent heartbreak she rarely spoke about out loud. The phone rang again suddenly, startling her so badly she nearly drifted into another lane. Vanessa calling again. Angela stared at the screen while memories from their last conversation replayed painfully inside her mind. Her sister's voice had sounded frustrated, almost desperate. "You keep pushing everyone away before they can hurt you," Vanessa told her earlier that week. Angela snapped back immediately, anger rising faster than she expected. "You don't understand what I've survived." After that, the conversation only became worse. Years of buried hurt poured out of Angela all at once. Vanessa tried calming her down, but Angela no longer knew how to hear concern without feeling judged. Before hanging up that night, Vanessa's voice softened almost to a whisper. "I'm scared you've spent so much time surviving that you don't know how to let people love you anymore." Angela ended the call without responding. Now, driving alone through the storm, those words echoed painfully inside her head while Vanessa's name continued flashing across the dashboard beside her. Most people think life-changing moments arrive loudly. Sirens, crashes, dramatic warnings. But sometimes they arrive quietly through one phone call you are too hurt to answer. Angela pressed decline again and tossed the phone farther across the passenger seat. Tomorrow, she whispered to herself again, trying to quiet the uneasiness building inside her chest. Outside, rain pounded harder against the car windows while lightning stretched briefly across the sky. For a moment, Angela felt something she could not explain. Not fear exactly, just heaviness. The same strange heaviness she had felt several times over the past few months. It appeared during sleepless nights, during prayer, during quiet moments she spent alone thinking about how disconnected her life had become. Lately, strange things kept happening around her. Bible verses appearing repeatedly. Conversations that unsettled her. Dreams she could not fully explain. And somehow, every uncomfortable feeling always seemed connected to the same painful truth Angela spent years avoiding. Somewhere along the way, she stopped believing God still spoke to people like her. 3 nights earlier, Angela sat silently inside the employee break room at St. Matthew's Medical Center staring at a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and vending machine food while nurses hurried through the hallway outside preparing for another chaotic shift. Angela barely noticed any of it. Her mind stayed somewhere else completely. Vanessa had called twice that morning asking if she wanted to come over for dinner Sunday evening. Angela ignored both calls at first before finally texting a short excuse about being tired from work. The truth was she had become emotionally exhausted by almost everyone lately, especially the people trying hardest to help her. Somewhere after the divorce, after years of carrying burdens she never fully healed from, Angela stopped knowing how to receive love without suspicion attached to it. Vanessa noticed the change long before anyone else did. She kept inviting Angela to church events, family dinners, weekend walks through the park, anything to stop her sister from isolating herself completely. But every attempt seemed to push Angela farther away instead. One nurse named Claire walked into the break room carrying patient files before pausing beside the table. "You okay?" she asked gently. Angela looked up quickly, forcing a small smile. "Long week." Claire nodded sympathetically before lowering her voice slightly. "You ever feel like life just keeps trying to get your attention?" Angela frowned faintly. "What do you mean?" Claire shrugged while setting the files down. "I don't know. Sometimes it feels like God keeps speaking to people, but we're too distracted or hurt to notice." Angela felt her stomach tighten unexpectedly hearing those words. Claire laughed awkwardly afterward. "Sorry. That sounded deeper than I meant it to." But Angela barely heard the apology because something about the sentence unsettled her deeply. God keeps speaking to people. The thought lingered long after Claire left the room. Because lately Angela had started wondering the same thing herself. Not whether God existed. She still believed that. The harder question was whether she believed he still cared enough to reach for someone carrying this much disappointment inside them. As thunder rolled above the highway again, Angela finally pulled into the parking lot outside her apartment complex just after midnight. Rainwater soaked through her shoes while she hurried toward the building entrance, carrying her purse tightly against her chest. Her phone vibrated once more before going silent completely. Vanessa's final call unanswered. Angela stopped walking for several seconds beneath the dim parking lot lights, staring down at the dark screen in her hand. Guilt pressed heavily against her chest now, but pride and exhaustion kept winning the battle inside her mind. "Tomorrow," she whispered one last time before slipping the phone back into her purse and walking upstairs toward the empty apartment waiting for her. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because what Angela Brooks still did not know that night was that somewhere across the city, emergency lights were already flashing through the rain. And before the sun rose the next morning, one hospital phone call would force her to confront a painful truth she had spent most of her life trying to outrun. To most people, Angela Brooks looked strong. At 52 years old, she had built a reputation around being dependable no matter what life placed on her shoulders. At St. Matthew's Medical Center, younger nurses often whispered that Angela never seemed shaken by anything. Patients trusted her almost instantly because her calm voice carried comfort during some of the worst moments of their lives. Even at church, people admired her quiet consistency. She attended every Sunday. She volunteered when help was needed. She smiled politely when people asked how she was doing. But privately, Angela was emotionally exhausted in ways very few people understood. Years of heartbreak had slowly drained something important from inside her. Somewhere between betrayal, disappointment, loneliness, and unanswered prayers, she stopped expecting good things from life anymore. The hardest part was that most people never noticed the change happening. Emotional numbness does not always look dramatic from the outside. Sometimes it simply looks like a person surviving quietly while their heart slowly shuts down. Vanessa noticed it long before everyone else did. She noticed how Angela stopped laughing the way she used to. She noticed how phone calls became shorter, how family dinners became excuses, how church worship turned into silent standing instead of genuine connection. One Sunday afternoon after service, Vanessa sat across from Angela inside a small diner near the interstate while stirring cream into her coffee slowly. "You've disappeared," she said softly. Angela frowned slightly. "I'm sitting right here." Vanessa shook her head immediately. "No, I mean emotionally." Angela looked down at the table, avoiding eye contact. "I'm just tired." Vanessa leaned forward, carefully lowering her voice. "Angela, being tired and being emotionally gone are not the same thing." For several seconds, Angela said nothing at all. Then she forced a small smile that never fully reached her eyes. "You worry too much." But Vanessa did not smile back because deep down she knew something was deeply wrong with her sister. The frightening part was not just the sadness. It was how normal the sadness had become. The strange thing was that warning signs had started appearing long before Vanessa's accident. At first, Angela ignored them because they seemed small and meaningless. Certain Bible verses appearing repeatedly in random places. Strange dreams waking her up in the middle of the night. Uneasy feelings she could never fully explain. Once during a late-night drive home from work, Angela heard Isaiah 41 verse 10 quoted 3 different times within less than 24 hours. First during a church sermon, then through a radio preacher while driving home, then again through a text message from Vanessa that simply read, "Fear not, for I am with you." Angela stared at the message for several long seconds before locking her phone without responding. Another time, while standing in line at a grocery store after work, an older woman beside her looked directly into her eyes and quietly said something that unsettled her for days afterward. "Don't ignore the call, you need to answer." Angela turned confused immediately. "Excuse me?" But the woman simply smiled softly and walked away before Angela could ask anything else. Moments like that kept happening. Small moments. Strange moments. The kind people usually dismiss until life finally forces them to look back differently. And somehow, every warning always seemed connected to the same painful part of Angela's life. David. Even hearing his name still made something tighten painfully inside her chest. Vanessa noticed that too. One evening while helping Angela unpack groceries inside her apartment kitchen, Vanessa carefully asked, "Have you ever considered that maybe God was trying to protect you long before everything fell apart?" Angela immediately became defensive. "What's that supposed to mean?" Vanessa hesitated before answering carefully. "I just think sometimes we ignore peace because we're afraid of being alone." Angela laughed bitterly under her breath. "Easy for you to say. Your marriage actually worked." Vanessa looked down quietly for a moment before speaking again. "You think I never saw the signs with David?" Angela froze slightly hearing that. Vanessa continued softly, "I think deep down, you saw them too." Silence filled the kitchen immediately afterward. Angela grabbed a grocery bag quickly just to avoid looking at her sister. Because the truth was there had been signs. Warnings. Moments she buried years ago and tried desperately not to revisit now. By the time David left the marriage, something inside Angela had already grown cold. Not hateful. Not cruel. Just emotionally worn down after years of carrying pain she never properly healed from. That numbness slowly affected every relationship around her. Marcus became distant. Elise stopped opening up emotionally. Vanessa kept trying to pull Angela back toward life, but every attempt felt harder than the last. One night during a phone call, Vanessa finally said what nobody else had the courage to say directly. "I think your pain became louder than God's voice." Angela gripped the phone tightly while anger rose instantly inside her chest. "You don't understand what I survived," she whispered shakily. Vanessa's voice softened immediately. "Then help me understand." But Angela no longer knew how to explain herself without reopening wounds she spent years trying to bury. That conversation became one of many painful moments leading up to the stormy Thursday night when Vanessa kept calling again and again while Angela refused to answer. And the deeper the story goes, the more one painful question begins following everything surrounding Angela Brooks. What exactly happened between Angela, David, and the God she once trusted so deeply before her entire life slowly started falling apart? Angela Brooks grew up in a small rural town outside Savannah, Georgia, in an old white house surrounded by pine trees and dirt roads that turned muddy every time it rained. The house was never loud, never joyful in the way some homes felt on television. Most days it smelled like coffee, medicine, and the faint scent of old church hymn books stacked beside her mother's chair in the living room. By the age of 12, Angela already understood responsibilities most children never think about. Her mother, Evelyn, spent years battling health problems that left her too weak to move around some days, while her father worked long construction shifts trying to keep food on the table. He loved his family deeply, but exhaustion made him quiet and emotionally distant. Angela learned very early that when people are tired enough, love sometimes sounds more like silence than affection. While other girls worried about dances or friends at school, Angela worried about helping her mother take medication on time, washing dishes before her father came home, and making sure Vanessa finished her homework before bed. Somewhere during those early years, Angela quietly developed a dangerous belief she carried into adulthood without realizing it. She began believing love meant sacrifice. Love meant enduring. Love meant carrying everyone else's pain without complaining. Vanessa followed Angela everywhere growing up. She copied the way her older sister dressed, braided her hair like Angela did, and sat beside her every Sunday morning in church while their mother sang softly in the choir. Even as children, the sisters were completely different emotionally. Vanessa laughed easily and trusted people naturally. Angela was more guarded, more responsible, more aware of how quickly life could become difficult. One stormy night when Vanessa was only 7 years old, thunder knocked out electricity across the neighborhood and the entire house went dark. Vanessa immediately burst into tears and ran toward Angela's bedroom. Angela sat beside her little sister on the floor holding a flashlight beneath her chin while trying to make her laugh. "You know what Mama always says," Angela whispered softly while thunder rattled the windows. Vanessa wiped tears from her face. "What?" Angela smiled gently. "God stays closest during dark seasons." Vanessa looked at her carefully. "Do you really believe that?" Angela nodded immediately back then. "I do." Years later, Vanessa would remember that conversation often because somewhere between childhood and middle age, Angela slowly stopped believing the very words she once used to comfort everyone else. Church became the one place where Angela felt safe growing up. Sunday mornings brought structure into a life that otherwise felt heavy. She loved gospel music, Bible study dinners, and the way church members treated one another like family during difficult seasons. By high school, Angela had already become known as dependable. If someone needed help cleaning after events, Angela stayed late. If elderly church members needed meals delivered, Angela volunteered first. People constantly praised her maturity, but nobody noticed how quickly she learned to ignore her own emotional needs. One afternoon after church, Vanessa followed Angela into the kitchen while their mother rested in the living room nearby. Angela stood at the counter washing dishes while Vanessa watched quietly. "Why do you always take care of everybody?" Vanessa asked. Angela shrugged casually. "Because somebody has to." Vanessa frowned. "But who takes care of you?" Angela laughed softly like the question did not matter, but deep down she had no answer. Nobody had ever really asked her that before. And because she spent so many years being needed, Angela eventually confused being needed with being loved. As Angela got older, that caretaker instinct only became stronger. By 23, she was deeply involved in church ministry and working toward becoming a nurse while helping support her family financially at the same time. She barely rested. She barely slowed down. But she told herself hard work and sacrifice were simply part of life. Vanessa noticed the pressure building inside her long before anyone else did. One evening while the sisters sat outside on the porch after dinner, Vanessa looked over at Angela and said quietly, "You know you don't always have to be strong, right?" Angela laughed under her breath. "That sounds nice in theory." Vanessa shook her head gently. "I'm serious." Angela stared out toward the dark Georgia road ahead of them before answering softly, "If I fall apart, everything around me falls apart too." Vanessa became quiet hearing that because even then she realized her sister carried emotional weight far beyond her years. The problem was that Angela had spent so much of her life surviving difficult seasons that eventually pain started feeling normal to her. Endurance became her identity. And years later, that same mindset would become the reason she tolerated heartbreak far longer than she should have. Everything began changing the summer Angela met David Brooks at church. He walked into rooms with confidence that immediately attracted people toward him. Older church members admired how respectful and charismatic he seemed. Younger people loved how easily he made everyone laugh. David noticed Angela almost immediately, and unlike most men, he paid attention to the small details others overlooked. He asked about her mother's health. He offered to help repair things around the house when Angela's father injured his shoulder one year. He listened carefully when Angela spoke, and for the first time in years, she felt emotionally seen instead of simply depended on. One night after a church fundraiser, David walked her to her car beneath soft parking lot lights, while warm rain drizzled around them. "You spend so much time taking care of everybody else," he told her gently. "Who takes care of you?" Angela felt tears rise unexpectedly because nobody had ever spoken to her that way before. Later that night, while sitting alone in her bedroom, Angela whispered a quiet prayer into the darkness. "Maybe this is finally my turn to be loved." And deep down, she truly believed God had finally answered her prayers. When he spoke to someone, he listened carefully, maintained eye contact, and remembered small details most people forgot. Angela noticed him immediately, but what affected her most was how quickly he noticed her too. During one church fundraiser, David volunteered to help clean afterward and spent nearly an hour talking with Angela while folding tables together late into the evening. "You know," he said casually while carrying chairs across the fellowship hall, "everybody talks about how dependable you are." Angela laughed softly. "That usually means people think I work too much." David smiled. "No, it means you make people feel safe." Angela felt something shift emotionally hearing that because very few people ever looked beyond her responsibilities long enough to actually see her. Over the following months, David became a constant presence in Angela's life. He called often. He brought coffee during long volunteer meetings. He checked on her mother's health regularly and even helped Angela's father repair part of their porch one summer weekend. Vanessa noticed the change in her sister immediately. One evening while helping Angela get ready for a church banquet, Vanessa grinned while watching her carefully choose earrings in the bedroom mirror. "You really like him," she teased. Angela tried hiding her smile. "He's just different." Vanessa laughed softly. "Different how?" Angela paused before answering quietly, "He makes me feel noticed." And that was the truth. After years of carrying emotional burdens quietly, David's attention felt comforting to Angela. Safe even. But what Angela did not yet understand was how loneliness can sometimes make attention feel like peace. Their relationship moved quickly. Within a year, David proposed during a church picnic surrounded by cheering friends and family. Angela cried the moment he slipped the ring onto her finger because part of her truly believed every difficult season in her life had finally led her toward this moment. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future that felt lighter than her past. A peaceful home, a loving husband, children growing up differently than she had. But even during the happiest moments, something uneasy kept surfacing deep inside her spirit. The strange feeling usually came during prayer. Every time Angela truly prayed about marrying David, her chest tightened instead of relaxing. She could never explain it clearly. It was not fear exactly. It felt heavier than nervousness, but quieter than panic. One night after Bible study, Angela sat alone in her bedroom kneeling beside the bed trying to pray through the uneasiness. "God," she whispered softly, "if this is right, why do I feel so unsettled?" But instead of peace, the heaviness remained. A few weeks later, Angela experienced the first moment that truly frightened her. She and David were eating dinner at a crowded restaurant after church when the waiter accidentally brought the wrong order to their table. At first, David laughed it off casually, but within seconds his entire expression changed. His voice became sharp and aggressive so suddenly that nearby tables turned to look. "How hard is it to do your job correctly?" he snapped loudly while the young waiter apologized nervously. Angela froze watching him because she had never seen that side of him before. The anger disappeared almost as quickly as it appeared. By the time they reached the parking lot, David was apologizing repeatedly. "I'm sorry," he said while rubbing his forehead. "Work stress has been killing me lately." Angela nodded slowly, trying to convince herself everyone lost their temper sometimes. But later that night while lying awake in bed, she could still hear the harshness in his voice echoing inside her mind. Her mother noticed the change in Angela almost immediately afterward. One evening while folding laundry together in the kitchen, Evelyn looked over quietly and asked, "When you pray about David, do you feel peace or pressure?" Angela became defensive instantly. "Mama, why does everybody keep acting like something's wrong?" Evelyn stayed calm. "I'm just asking you to be honest with yourself." Angela shook her head impatiently. "David loves me." Her mother nodded gently, but sadness filled her eyes. "Baby, some people enter our lives to teach us something. That doesn't always mean they're meant to stay forever." Angela looked away immediately because she did not want to hear anything threatening the future she had already imagined for herself. Deep down, she feared starting over alone far more than she feared the quiet warnings rising inside her spirit. And slowly, without realizing it, Angela began doing what many hurting people do when they desperately want something to work. She started ignoring the difference between emotional pressure and genuine peace. The first few years of Angela and David Brooks's marriage looked beautiful from the outside. Church photos captured smiling holidays, birthday dinners, vacations near the Florida coast, and Sunday mornings with matching outfits and forced laughter. When Marcus was born, Angela believed motherhood would finally give their home the stability she kept praying for. Then Elise arrived 3 years later, and for a brief season, Angela convinced herself everything was becoming the life she once dreamed about. But slowly, behind closed doors, the marriage began changing in ways difficult to explain to anyone outside the home. David rarely exploded all at once. His behavior shifted gradually, quietly enough that Angela kept excusing it. He criticized her constantly but disguised it as jokes. He disappeared for hours without explanation and became irritated whenever she asked questions. If bills went unpaid, somehow the conversation always turned into Angela being too emotional or too controlling. And every single time she confronted him about something hurtful, David found a way to make her feel guilty for reacting to it. Angela spent years trying to become smaller emotionally just to keep peace inside the house. If David came home irritated, she stayed quiet. If he ignored her for days, she convinced herself he was stressed. If arguments became cruel, she apologized first just to end the tension. Somewhere along the way, survival slowly replaced happiness as the goal of her marriage. By her mid-30s, Angela no longer woke up asking herself whether she felt loved. She only wondered whether the day would end without conflict. Vanessa noticed the exhaustion growing inside her sister long before Angela admitted it herself. One evening after church, Vanessa sat beside Angela in the parking lot while rain tapped softly against the windshield. "You don't look happy anymore," Vanessa whispered carefully. Angela stared ahead silently for several seconds before forcing a weak smile. "Marriage is hard." Vanessa shook her head gently. "Hard and painful are not the same thing." Angela immediately defended David out of habit. "He's under pressure financially." Vanessa looked at her sister sadly. "Angela, you defend him even when he hurts you." Angela's eyes filled with tears instantly, but she quickly wiped them away before answering softly, "I made vows, Vanessa." Deep down, Angela still believed enduring suffering made her faithful. The cheating started long before Angela fully admitted it to herself. At first it was suspicious phone calls, hidden text messages, and stories that never quite added up. David always had explanations ready. "You're imagining things. She's just a coworker. You're becoming paranoid." Angela wanted desperately to believe him because the truth felt too devastating to face. One night during Marcus's 8th birthday party, Angela accidentally saw flirtatious messages from another woman appear across David's phone screen while he was outside grilling. Her chest tightened immediately. Later that night after the children fell asleep, Angela confronted him quietly in the kitchen. "Who is she?" she whispered while holding the phone with trembling hands. David immediately became defensive. You went through my phone? Angela stared at him in disbelief. That's what you're focused on right now? David paced angrily through the kitchen before finally breaking down into tears, apologizing repeatedly and promising it meant nothing. I swear I'll fix this, he begged while holding her hands. Angela cried with him that night because she wanted so badly to believe the marriage could still be saved. But even after the apologies, something inside her spirit kept growing heavier. As the years passed, David's manipulation became emotionally exhausting. He lied about money constantly. Bills piled up while he spent recklessly behind Angela's back. He disappeared entire weekends claiming work emergencies that never fully made sense. Whenever Angela tried expressing pain, David somehow redirected the conversation until she ended up comforting him instead. Slowly, Angela stopped voicing her feelings altogether because every difficult conversation left her emotionally drained for days afterward. She buried herself deeper into work at St. Matthew's Medical Center, picking up extra shifts partly for financial reasons and partly because the hospital felt emotionally safer than home. Patients trusted her. Coworkers respected her. Inside hospital hallways, Angela still knew who she was. But inside her own marriage, she increasingly felt invisible. Marcus noticed the tension before anyone realized how deeply it affected him. As a teenager, he became angry in ways Angela struggled to understand at first. He snapped easily, avoided being home, and constantly challenged David during arguments. One night, after overhearing another explosive fight between his parents, Marcus stormed into the kitchen while Angela cried quietly beside the sink. "Why do you let him talk to you like that?" he demanded angrily. Angela immediately lowered her voice. "Marcus, go to your room." But he refused to move. "No, I'm serious." His eyes filled with frustration and heartbreak. "Why do you keep pretending this family is okay?" Angela felt tears rise instantly. "I'm trying to keep this family together." Marcus shook his head bitterly. "No, Mom. You're trying to survive." The words hit Angela like a punch to the chest because deep down she knew he was right. She had spent so many years enduring pain in the name of loyalty that she no longer recognized how deeply the suffering was affecting everyone around her. Elise responded differently. While Marcus became louder emotionally, Elise slowly disappeared inward. By middle school, she rarely invited friends home anymore. She avoided family dinners whenever possible and spent hours isolated in her bedroom listening to music through headphones just to escape the tension inside the house. Angela often stood outside Elise's room late at night wanting desperately to reconnect with her daughter, but never knowing how. One evening, Angela finally sat beside Elise on the bed and whispered softly, "Baby, talk to me." Elise stared down at her hands for several long seconds before quietly asking, "Why don't you leave him?" Angela froze completely. Hearing the question from her daughter hurt worse than hearing it from Marcus, because Elise almost never spoke about emotional things openly. Angela swallowed hard before answering weakly, "Marriage is complicated." Elise looked up with tears in her eyes. "No, Mom. You're just unhappy." Angela had no response because the truth sat painfully between them already. By her late 40s, Angela Brooks no longer recognized herself emotionally. She woke up tired. She prayed without expectation. Church worship that once brought comfort now felt distant and hollow. Sometimes during Sunday services, she stood silently while everyone around her lifted their hands singing about joy and peace, but inside she felt numb. Not angry at God exactly, just exhausted spiritually. She had spent years begging heaven to heal her marriage, change David, restore her family, and ease the constant emotional heaviness inside their home. But nothing truly changed. And over time, disappointment slowly hardened parts of Angela's heart she once thought would always stay soft. Vanessa kept reaching for her during those years, calling almost daily, encouraging counseling, prayer, and honesty. But Angela resisted every difficult conversation because acknowledging how broken things had become felt unbearable. Survival had become her identity now. And the longer she survived pain without healing from it, the colder and more emotionally distant she quietly became from everyone who loved her most. After nearly 27 years of marriage, David Brooks left on an ordinary Friday afternoon while Angela was working a double shift at St. Matthew's Medical Center. There was no dramatic goodbye, no final conversation, no apology. When Angela returned home close to midnight, half his closet was empty, drawers had been cleared out, and several garbage bags were missing from the garage. At first, she thought maybe he had gone to stay somewhere temporarily after their latest argument. Then she noticed the note sitting on the kitchen counter beside unpaid bills. "We both know this hasn't worked for a long time." That was it. Angela stood there silently in her nursing scrubs staring at the handwriting while something inside her finally gave up. A week later, she discovered David had been involved with another woman for nearly 2 years. Vanessa came over the night Angela found out and immediately wrapped her arms around her crying sister. "Angela," she whispered softly. But Angela barely reacted. She simply sat motionless on the couch staring ahead while tears rolled silently down her face. "I wasted my whole life trying to save something that was already dead," she said quietly. The divorce shattered more than the marriage. Marcus stopped calling regularly after moving to Nashville for work, still carrying years of anger toward both parents. Elise moved to Chicago shortly after college and kept conversations short whenever Angela reached out. Holidays became awkward. Family dinners disappeared. And eventually Angela downsized into a small apartment 30 minutes outside Atlanta that never truly felt like home. Most nights, she came back from the hospital exhausted, kicked off her shoes near the door, and sat alone in silence, with the television running only to fill the emptiness. Vanessa kept trying to pull her out of isolation. "Come to church with me Wednesday," she would say over the phone. Or "let's at least get dinner." But Angela almost always found excuses. "I'm tired. Maybe next week. I've got another shift." The truth was Angela no longer knew how to emotionally connect with anyone anymore. Not her children. Not herself. Not even God. One night after another exhausting shift, Angela sat alone on the edge of her bed staring at the ceiling while rain tapped softly against the apartment windows. "I prayed for years," she whispered bitterly into the darkness. "I begged you to help me." Tears slid slowly down her face. And nothing changed. The silence that followed felt unbearable. For the first time since childhood, Angela stopped praying regularly altogether. Church became routine instead of refuge. Worship songs felt empty. Scriptures sounded distant. Somewhere between betrayal, exhaustion, and disappointment, Angela Brooks slowly stopped believing God still cared what happened to her. Vanessa Reed refused to give up on her sister, even after Angela Brooks emotionally shut down from almost everyone around her. Nearly every morning, Angela woke up to another text message waiting on her phone. Sometimes it was a simple, "thinking about you today." Other times it was a Bible verse, a prayer, or an invitation to dinner that Angela usually ignored. Vanessa kept calling anyway. "You can't keep isolating yourself like this, Angie," she said gently one evening during a phone call while Angela sat alone in her apartment after work. Angela rubbed her forehead tiredly. "I'm fine." Vanessa sighed softly. "No, you're functioning. That's different." Angela became quiet because deep down she knew her sister was right. Vanessa constantly tried reconnecting Angela with Marcus and Elise too. One afternoon she called after speaking with Marcus. "He misses you," Vanessa told her carefully. Angela laughed bitterly from the kitchen sink while washing dishes. "Marcus barely talks to me." "Because he's hurt," Vanessa replied. "Not because he stopped loving you." Angela's jaw tightened immediately. "Everybody keeps acting like I'm the problem." Vanessa's voice softened. "No, Angie. I think you've just been in survival mode for so long that you don't know how to let people love you anymore." The words hit Angela harder than she wanted to admit. But instead of opening up emotionally, she shut down again. "I'm tired, Vanessa." "I know," Vanessa whispered sadly. "That's exactly what scares me." As months passed, strange moments started happening around Angela that unsettled her deeply. The first came through a dream. One night, she dreamed she was standing alone inside her childhood church, wearing her old wedding dress, while Vanessa sat silently near the altar watching her with tears in her eyes. As Angela slowly walked down the empty aisle, a voice echoed softly through the sanctuary. This road will cost you more than you know. Angela woke up around 3 in the morning, shaking and covered in tears. Unable to calm herself, she reached for the Bible sitting on the coffee table beside her couch. The pages opened almost immediately to Matthew 28 verse 20, Isaiah 41 verse 10, and surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age. Angela stared at the verse for several long seconds before quietly closing the Bible again. But over the following weeks, the scripture kept appearing everywhere. During church sermons, on the radio driving home from work, in random devotionals online. Vanessa texted Isaiah 41 verse 10 repeatedly too. Fear not, for I am with you, followed by messages like, God hasn't abandoned you, Angie. The repetition unsettled Angela more each time she saw it because deep down it felt personal somehow. Then came the moment at the grocery store. Angela had just finished another exhausting shift at the hospital and stopped to buy coffee and groceries before heading home. While reaching for bottled water near the back aisle, an older woman suddenly touched her arm gently. Angela turned slightly startled. The woman looked at her quietly for several seconds before speaking in a calm voice. Don't ignore the call, you need to answer. Angela froze immediately. I'm sorry, she asked softly. But the woman only smiled faintly before walking away down the aisle. For several moments Angela stood there motionless, gripping the shopping cart while chills spread through her body. She looked around trying to find the woman again, but she was gone completely. Driving home that night, the sentence kept replaying inside her mind. Don't ignore the call, you need to answer. And somehow, without fully understanding why, Angela suddenly thought about Vanessa. 3 nights before the accident, Vanessa Reed called Angela Brooks after speaking with Marcus earlier that afternoon. Angela had just returned home from another exhausting shift at St. Matthew's Medical Center and was standing in her dark kitchen loosening her hospital badge when the phone rang. The moment she saw Vanessa's name appear on the screen, she almost ignored it out of pure emotional exhaustion. But after several rings, she finally answered. What? Angela said tiredly while leaning against the counter. Vanessa immediately noticed the heaviness in her sister's voice. Okay, rough day? Angela exhaled sharply. Every day is a rough day lately. There was a brief silence before Vanessa spoke again carefully. Marcus called me earlier. Angela's expression hardened instantly. Of course he did. Angela, he misses you. Angela laughed bitterly. No. Marcus blames me for everything that happened with David. Vanessa lowered her voice gently. He's hurt. That's different. Something inside Angela suddenly snapped. Everybody's hurt, Vanessa, she shouted. You act like I'm the only person responsible for how things turned out. Vanessa became quiet for several seconds before responding softly, That's not what I'm saying. Angela paced across the kitchen now, years of exhaustion finally boiling over emotionally. You don't understand what I survived, she whispered shakily through tears. You got the good marriage. You got peace. You didn't spend almost 30 years begging God to fix someone who kept destroying you piece by piece. Vanessa's voice softened immediately after hearing her sister cry. Angela, just because someone carries pain differently doesn't mean they escaped pain. But Angela could barely hear her anymore through the anger and heartbreak rising inside her chest. I prayed for years, Angela continued emotionally. I stayed faithful. I endured humiliation, betrayal, lies, and nothing changed. So forgive me if I'm tired of hearing about faith and healing and trusting God. Silence filled the line for a moment. Then Vanessa spoke words that stopped Angela cold. I think your pain became louder than God's voice. Angela closed her eyes tightly, gripping the kitchen counter as tears slid down her face. Something about the sentence hurt because deep down she feared it was true. Vanessa continued softly, almost pleading now. Angie, you've become so guarded. You keep pushing away everybody who loves you before they can get close enough to hurt you again. Angela wiped angrily at her tears. I can't do this conversation tonight. Please listen to me. I'm tired, Vanessa. Angela. But Angela had already emotionally shut down again. I'll talk to you later, she whispered coldly. Before Vanessa could respond, Angela ended the call. For several long seconds afterward, she stood motionless in the dark kitchen staring at the phone in her trembling hand while guilt quietly settled inside her chest. Part of her wanted to call back immediately. Another part felt too exhausted to keep fighting through another emotional conversation. Then her phone buzzed one final time. A text from Vanessa. "Please don't shut me out again." 2 days later, Angela Brooks drove home through one of the worst storms Atlanta had seen all month. Rain slammed violently against the windshield while thunder rolled across the highway in the distance. Traffic moved slowly beneath flashing brake lights, and exhaustion sat heavily inside Angela's chest after another 12-hour shift at St. Matthew's Medical Center. Around 11:47 p.m., her phone vibrated beside her on the passenger seat. Vanessa calling. Angela glanced at the screen briefly before looking back at the road. Her stomach tightened immediately. For several seconds, she considered answering. But then memories from their argument replayed inside her mind. "I think your pain became louder than God's voice." Angela gripped the steering wheel harder. The phone stopped vibrating. Then seconds later, it rang again. "Vanessa." Angela closed her eyes briefly at a red light while frustration and exhaustion battled inside her chest. "I can't do this tonight," she whispered shakily to herself. The call stopped again. A third time, the phone lit up. Vanessa calling. Angela stared at the screen while rain pounded harder against the car roof. Her thumb hovered over the answer button for one painful moment. Then slowly, she pressed decline. "I'll call her tomorrow," she whispered quietly. The phone went silent. And somewhere several miles away, Vanessa Reed's car was already losing control on Interstate 85. Angela barely slept after getting home that night. She eventually fell asleep on the couch sometime after 1 a.m. with the television still glowing softly across the apartment. Then around 2:14 in the morning, her phone rang again. This time it was not Vanessa. Half awake, Angela grabbed the phone from the coffee table and frowned at the unfamiliar number. "Hello," she answered groggily. "May I speak with Ms. Angela Brooks?" Angela sat upright immediately after hearing the serious tone in the man's voice. "This is Angela." There was a pause. Then the doctor spoke carefully. "Ms. Brooks, your sister was involved in a serious accident tonight." Angela froze completely. "What?" she whispered. She was brought into Northside Memorial after a multi-vehicle collision during the storm. Angela stood up so quickly she nearly dropped the phone. No, there has to be some mistake." "I'm very sorry," the doctor continued gently. "You need to come immediately." The drive to the hospital felt endless. Angela could barely see through the storm or the tears blurring her vision. She sped through red lights while gripping the steering wheel so tightly her hands hurt. "Please God," she cried repeatedly through sobs. "Please let her still be alive. Please." But deep down, terror had already settled into her spirit. When Angela finally arrived at Northside Memorial, rainwater soaked through her clothes as she ran through the emergency entrance searching frantically for someone to help her. Bright hospital lights reflected against polished floors while nurses rushed through hallways around her. "My sister," Angela gasped breathlessly at the front desk. "Vanessa Reed. They called me." The receptionist's face changed instantly. Within seconds, a doctor wearing navy scrubs began walking slowly toward her. And the moment Angela saw the grief in his eyes, she already knew. "No," she whispered immediately while backing away slightly. "No, please." The doctor stopped in front of her. "Ms. Brooks." Angela shook her head violently before he could finish speaking. "No." His voice lowered softly. "We did everything we could." Something inside Angela collapsed. A nurse quickly caught her as her legs gave out beneath her. Suddenly she was sitting in a hospital chair, unable to breathe properly, while silent tears poured down her face uncontrollably. The hallway around her blurred completely. She had spent almost 30 years comforting grieving families inside hospitals. But nothing prepared her for this hallway. Nothing prepared her for becoming the devastated family member instead of the nurse. A few minutes later, Angela slowly walked into Vanessa's room. The silence nearly destroyed her. Vanessa looked peaceful beneath the dim hospital lights, but painfully still in a way Angela could not emotionally process. Angela covered her mouth immediately as sobs tore through her body. "Vanessa," she whispered brokenly while stumbling toward the bed. She grabbed her sister's hand desperately. Cold. Angela collapsed beside the bed, crying harder than she ever had in her life. "I'm sorry," she kept whispering repeatedly through sobs. "I'm so sorry. I should have answered. I should have answered." But no response came back. Only silence. Several hours later, sometime close to sunrise, Angela sat alone inside her apartment, still wearing damp clothes from the storm, when she suddenly remembered the voicemail. Her chest tightened instantly. 3 missed calls. 1 voicemail left at 11:52 p.m. Angela stared at the screen for several seconds before finally pressing play with trembling hands. Vanessa's voice filled the apartment softly. "Hey sis." Angela immediately broke down hearing her voice again. "I know you're upset," Vanessa continued gently. "But I really need to talk to you." Angela covered her mouth, trying to hold herself together. "I had this feeling all day that something wasn't right." Tears streamed down Angela's face. "And I don't want us staying angry forever." There was a brief pause. Then came the final words Angela Brooks would replay for the rest of her life. "I love you." The funeral took place beneath gray skies that matched the heaviness sitting inside Angela Brooks's chest. Rainwater clung to umbrellas outside the church while people filled the sanctuary row by row, speaking in quiet voices that barely reached her anymore. Angela sat in the front beside Vanessa's husband, Daniel Reed, staring at the closed casket without moving. She barely remembered greeting anyone, barely remembered the worship songs. Her mind replayed only one thing over and over again. 3 missed calls. 1 ignored voicemail. 1 sentence she could never take back. "Please don't shut me out again." The pastor stood near the pulpit holding a Bible against his chest. "Vanessa Reed carried peace into every room she entered," he said softly. "Some people make others feel judged. Vanessa made people feel safe." Angela lowered her eyes immediately as tears burned behind them. Safe. That was exactly what Vanessa had tried to be for her during every painful season of her life. Even when Angela pushed her away. Even when bitterness made her difficult to love. Vanessa kept calling anyway. Halfway through the service, Marcus quietly reached for his mother's hand. Angela looked down at his fingers wrapped gently around hers and suddenly remembered how small his hands once were when he was a little boy frightened during thunderstorms. She nearly broke apart emotionally right there in the pew. After the burial, church members gathered around offering condolences while cold wind moved through the cemetery trees. An older woman from church hugged Angela tightly and whispered, "Your sister prayed for you constantly." Angela froze hearing those words. Prayed for you constantly. The sentence stayed inside her chest the entire drive home. The days after the funeral blurred together painfully. Angela stopped answering most phone calls unless they came from work. She moved through hospital shifts mechanically, speaking kindly to patients while emotionally hollow inside. At night, she sat alone in her apartment replaying Vanessa's voicemail repeatedly until she practically memorized every breath and pause inside it. "Hey sis." Angela would close her eyes immediately hearing Vanessa's voice. "I know you're upset with me." Some nights she cried so hard she could barely breathe afterward. Marcus called almost every evening from Nashville. "Mom, I think you should stay with me for a few days," he told her gently one night. "I'm fine," Angela whispered automatically. Marcus became quiet for a second before answering softly, "You've been saying that my whole life." The words hurt because they were true. Angela spent years pretending she was okay because she thought strength meant surviving silently. But now silence felt unbearable. The apartment felt colder than ever without Vanessa randomly showing up carrying groceries, coffee, or little handwritten Bible verses folded inside greeting cards. One night around 2 in the morning, Angela sat on her kitchen floor listening to the voicemail again while rain tapped softly against the windows. "I had this feeling all day that something wasn't right." Angela pressed the phone against her forehead crying, "I love you." The message ended. Silence filled the apartment again. Angela whispered shakily into the darkness, "I love you too, Vanessa." But this time her sister could not hear her. Nearly 3 weeks after the funeral, Angela finally gathered enough strength to visit Vanessa's house again. Daniel opened the front door looking exhausted, but grateful to see her. "You don't have to do this today," he said gently. Angela nodded quietly. "I want to." The house still smelled faintly like lavender candles and coffee. Vanessa's reading glasses rested beside an open devotional on the kitchen counter exactly where she left them. Family photographs lined the hallway walls. Everything looked painfully normal. Angela slowly helped organize paperwork and clothes while Daniel sorted storage boxes in the garage. Hours passed quietly before Angela wandered into Vanessa's small home office. A Bible sat open on the desk beside a brown leather journal. Angela stared at it for several seconds before slowly sitting down. At first, she only intended to straighten the papers nearby. But then she noticed her own name written across one folded page tucked carefully inside the journal. Angela. Her chest tightened immediately. With trembling hands, she unfolded the paper. "Lord, please heal Angela's heart." Angela stopped breathing for a moment. She kept reading. She's been surviving so long she forgot how to live. Tears immediately filled her eyes. Another page read, "Help her believe she's still worthy of joy after everything she survived with David." Angela covered her mouth, crying silently now. Page after page revealed prayers Vanessa had written over several years. Prayers for Angela's healing, her peace, her relationship with Marcus and Elise, her faith. Then Angela opened the Bible itself. Several folded handwritten notes slipped from between worn pages near Isaiah 41 verse 10 and scattered across the desk. "Fear not, for I am with you." Angela stared at the verse while chills moved through her body. Slowly, she unfolded another note. This one looked older. The handwriting was still Vanessa's. "I think Angela mistakes God's silence for abandonment." Angela's eyes filled instantly. Another line underneath read, "But I honestly believe he's been trying to reach her for years." Angela lowered the paper slowly while tears rolled down her face. Suddenly memories returned all at once. Her mother asking, "When you pray about him, do you feel peace or pressure?" The uneasiness before marrying David. The dreams. The stranger at the grocery store. "Don't ignore the call you need to answer." Vanessa quoting Isaiah 41 verse 10 over and over again. "You stopped listening a long time ago." Angela buried her face in her hands, crying harder than she had since the hospital. Because for the first time in decades, she realized something terrifying and comforting at the same time. God had never stopped reaching for her. Even when she ignored every warning. Even when bitterness hardened her heart. Even when grief isolated her from everyone who loved her. He stayed. And sitting there alone in Vanessa's office, surrounded by prayer journals, handwritten scriptures, and years of quiet love from the sister she lost, Angela Brooks finally understood that Vanessa had not spent her final years trying to judge her. She had been trying to save her. 3 days after leaving Vanessa's house, Angela Brooks found herself sitting alone inside the church sanctuary long after Wednesday Bible study had already ended. Most of the lights had been turned off except for a few dim lamps near the stage, casting soft shadows across rows of empty pews. The building felt completely still. No music. No conversations. Only silence stretching gently through the room. Angela sat near the front holding Vanessa's Bible against her chest. For several minutes she said nothing. No polished prayers. No rehearsed church words. Just exhaustion. The grief inside her no longer felt sharp the way it did at the hospital. Now it felt heavier. Deeper. Like years of buried pain were finally rising to the surface all at once. Angela slowly looked toward the cross near the stage while tears slipped quietly down her face. "Why couldn't I hear you?" she whispered. Her voice echoed softly through the empty sanctuary. Angela closed her eyes tightly as memories began returning one after another with painful clarity. Her mother folding laundry quietly in the kitchen years earlier. Peace and pressure are not the same thing, Angela. David screaming at the waiter in the parking lot before apologizing moments later. The tightness in her chest every time she prayed before the wedding. Vanessa sitting across from her at the diner saying softly, "Pain changes people." The stranger at the grocery store. "Don't ignore the call you need to answer." Angela pressed trembling fingers against her forehead. "You warned me," she whispered shakily through tears. "You really warned me." But even as the realization hurt her deeply, something unexpected happened inside her heart. For the first time, Angela no longer felt condemned by those memories. Only sad. Sad for the younger version of herself who confused loneliness with love. Sad for the woman who spent decades believing enduring pain made her faithful. Sad for how exhausted she became trying to save everyone except herself. Angela slowly opened Vanessa's Bible again. Her eyes landed immediately on Isaiah 41 verse 10. "Fear not, for I am with you." Angela stared at the verse quietly. Then suddenly another realization settled over her so gently it almost took her breath away. Even after she ignored the warnings, God never left her. Not during the nights David disappeared without explanation. Not during the screaming arguments. Not during the betrayal. Not during the divorce. Not during the lonely nights sitting alone in that apartment wondering if heaven had forgotten her completely. He stayed. Angela covered her mouth, crying harder now, but the tears felt different this time. Softer. Cleaner somehow. She remembered every moment Grace quietly carried her when she thought she was surviving alone. Church members bringing groceries during difficult financial seasons. Vanessa calling exactly when Angela felt emotionally broken. Marcus hugging her after years of distance. Elise wrapping her arms around her in the kitchen. Even through grief, love kept reaching for her again and again. Angela looked upward through tears. "You stayed," she whispered softly. "After everything. You still stayed." The silence around her no longer felt empty. For years Angela viewed God through the lens of disappointment alone. She thought unanswered prayers meant abandonment. She thought surviving heartbreak meant heaven had turned away from her pain. But sitting there alone in the sanctuary, she finally understood something Vanessa had tried desperately to tell her before the accident. Your pain became louder than God's voice. At the time, Angela felt angry hearing it. Now she understood. Pain had become so loud inside her life that eventually she stopped recognizing grace when it appeared. And yet somehow, despite all the bitterness, grief, regret, and emotional walls she built around herself, God kept reaching for her anyway. Angela remained in the sanctuary nearly an hour after that, quietly crying, praying, remembering. Not because every question suddenly disappeared. Not because all the regret was gone. But because for the first time in decades, her heart no longer felt emotionally numb. Something inside her had awakened again. Hope. Small. Fragile. But real. Healing did not arrive dramatically for Angela Brooks. There was no single morning where grief disappeared or every painful memory suddenly stopped hurting. Most days the progress felt small enough to miss if she wasn't paying attention closely. A few weeks after that night in the empty church sanctuary, Angela finally agreed to attend grief counseling through church after resisting it for months. The first session felt uncomfortable almost immediately. She sat stiffly in the chair with her arms folded while the counselor spoke gently across from her. "When was the last time you allowed yourself to be cared for instead of carrying everyone else?" the counselor asked softly. Angela opened her mouth to answer but stopped. Because honestly, she didn't know. For most of her life, Angela only understood survival. Taking care of people. Enduring pain quietly. Holding everything together while falling apart privately. The counselors studied her carefully before asking another question. What would happen if you stopped trying to be strong all the time? Angela looked down at her hands quietly. Then tears slowly filled her eyes. Outside therapy, small things began changing too. Angela started waking up earlier before work just to sit quietly on her apartment balcony with coffee and her journal instead of rushing through mornings emotionally numb. At first, writing felt awkward. Some entries were only a few sentences long. "I miss Vanessa. I'm angry. I still feel guilty." But slowly the journal became honest in ways her prayers had not been for years. One rainy evening after work, Angela stared down at the page before finally writing words she had avoided most of her adult life. "I don't want to survive anymore. I want to heal." Even reading the sentence back to herself made her emotional. Around that same time, Marcus called unexpectedly one Saturday morning. "You busy this weekend?" he asked. Angela hesitated. "Not really. I was thinking about driving down from Nashville." A small silence followed. "Only if you want me to," Marcus added carefully. Angela looked around the quiet apartment before answering softly, "I'd like that." Marcus arrived just after sunset carrying takeout containers and overnight bags. The atmosphere between them still felt slightly awkward at first, like two people learning each other again after years of emotional distance. While unpacking food in the kitchen, Marcus glanced toward Vanessa's framed photo resting near the window. "She'd probably yell at both of us for how stubborn we are," he said quietly. Angela laughed softly through emotion. "That sounds exactly like her." Later that night while washing dishes together, Marcus finally spoke more seriously. "You know, after Dad left, I was angry at you for a long time." Angela nodded slowly. "I know." Marcus leaned against the counter staring down at the floor. "I think part of me blamed you for staying." Angela swallowed hard, but didn't defend herself this time. Instead, she answered honestly. "I stayed because I thought enduring pain made me faithful." Her voice cracked slightly. "But I know now my survival hurt you too." Marcus became quiet for several seconds. Then finally, he stepped forward and hugged her tightly. "You were hurting too, Mom," he whispered emotionally. Angela closed her eyes, crying softly against his shoulder because for years she never allowed herself to believe her children might still understand her pain. A few weeks later, Elise visited from Chicago. Unlike Marcus, Elise always handled emotions quietly. She avoided confrontation, avoided deep conversations, avoided revisiting childhood memories whenever possible. But even she noticed something different the moment she walked into Angela's apartment. The curtains were open now. Soft worship music played quietly in the kitchen. Fresh flowers sat near the window beside Angela's journal and Bible. "You redecorated?" Elise asked jokingly while setting her bags down. Angela smiled faintly. "Maybe a little." That evening the two women cooked dinner together while rain tapped softly against the windows outside. At one point Elise glanced toward her mother carefully. "You seem lighter lately." Angela paused while stirring pasta quietly. "I finally stopped carrying things God never asked me to carry alone," she answered softly. Elise stared at her for a second before looking down again. "I think we all carried too much for too long," she admitted quietly. Angela reached over, gently squeezing her daughter's hand. "I'm sorry for the years I disappeared emotionally," she whispered. Elise's eyes filled immediately. "Mom." "No," Angela said gently. "You deserved better than a mother who is always exhausted by pain." Without another word, Elise wrapped her arms around her tightly. That night, for the first time in years, Angela sat around the dinner table with both of her children laughing softly between conversations and old memories. It wasn't perfect. Vanessa's absence still hurt every time her name came up. At one point Marcus smiled sadly and said, "Aunt Vanessa would have loved seeing this." Angela looked down at the table fighting tears. "She never stopped believing we'd find our way back to each other," she whispered. Warm light filled the apartment while quiet laughter echoed gently through the kitchen. The grief was still there. The scars were still there. But now love existed in the room too. And for the first time in decades, Angela Brooks no longer felt emotionally alone inside her own life. Later that night, after Marcus and Elise finally left the apartment, Angela Brooks stood quietly near the kitchen window holding a warm cup of tea between both hands. Outside, rain still tapped softly against the glass, just like it had the night Vanessa called her for the last time. For a few moments, Angela simply stood there listening. The apartment no longer felt painfully empty. Family photographs rested beside the shelves. Vanessa's Bible remained open near the kitchen counter beside Angela's journal filled with honest prayers and unfinished healing. And somewhere in the silence, echoes of laughter from dinner still lingered warmly through the room. Angela slowly closed her eyes while tears gathered again, though this time they carried gratitude instead of despair. "Thank you," she whispered softly. And for the first time in many years, those words felt real. Sometimes God's greatest mercy isn't preventing every painful choice. Sometimes It's refusing to leave us after we make them. Outside the window, the rain finally stopped. Inside the apartment, warmth remained where loneliness once lived. Angela smiled peacefully through quiet tears as distant laughter from her children replayed softly inside her memory. Subscribe if you loved this story and want more of this.